So basically, our traditional and customary rites really center on understanding the ahupua'a and the resources from Mauka to Makai, from the mountain to sea, and the people's relationship to their ahupua'a in gathering the things that they need for their daily life, and in their kuleana, their responsibility to malama and care for the resources. So attached to these rights is also a concomitant responsibility or kuleana to malama. So how I relate to ahupa is I'm just gonna talk to you about my ahupa. Actually, the early part of my childhood, I was raised in Kamalo. The latter part of my childhood was with my grandmother in Uhalapue. So Kamalo, one of the things that Mary Kavena Pukui in her example of the people of Kau on the Big Island, she talked about how in the struggle of survival, that was a way of really honing into their relationship to Ahupua and their kuleana to the land. And when I look at these stones, this is the old Kamalo Wharf. My dad, I don't know if he was part military before, but he used to make us walk these stones every day and learn how to have good balance and navigate our way in the natural realm and in the ocean in a good way. And he used to make us what I call walk the plank. There was this old pier on the side of these stones, and we had to walk along these old wooden planks. And I thought the water was so deep. I go out there now, it's like this high, but it was so scary for me. And my dad said, "You're gonna get goat legs if you do this regimen," you know. So it gave me good balance and made me see, you know, have respect for the natural area. And this is the place where I gathered clams when still had clams, and went crabbing, lay net, all these things. So again, like going back to Mary Kavena Pukui, I mean, every scar on my legs is from, you know, fishing and hitting the reef when the wave pound you against the reef and all those things. So, you know, embedded on my body is the memory of this ahupua. So it's really about knowing your ahupua in all levels. So this is Ualapui where my grandmother lives, and we knew all this, the mountain area, like the back of our hand, and there's a whole complex of heiau there, and we would walk to these different heiau, and there was a sense of respect. And, you know, so it was really ingrained in us growing up. And you know, I'm gonna show you my fishing grounds, but don't you guys go over there, okay? This is just for illustration. Okay. So this is Ualapui, this area. And just to let you know how productive these lands are, there's 40 ahupua'a in Manae on the east side of Molokai. And some of the ahupua'a is only like 1/8 mile, if that. And it really was how much resources is on your land that can sustain you. So this is telling you that the land is super productive. So my grandmother's house is over here by Ualapui Fish Pond. And we'd walk out along this fish pond. The Pedro's Ohana house is over here. And we used to go out here and we'd fish. We'd let the current take us down this way. And then we would never pass this fish pond. There's a stream coming out here, and that's the ahupua of Ka'ananui. And I didn't know that wasn't ahupua. I just knew that I couldn't go past this fish pond. And my dad never tell me why, you know. And it's really this is something that Professor Beamer talked about in his thesis Huika Palena. He says, you know, Hawaiians have this mental map of the boundaries of their place that weren't necessarily articulated as lines on a map. But these palena or boundaries had unique characteristics associated with place. So I knew my palena without my dad really telling me. We just always stopped here. And over here, this all my limu grounds, limu ele ele and pakalawa'a, which most people know as hulu hulu waina, chop chop limu, and manawea. So that's another thing you can tell with Hawaiians. If they're very ho'okano, they're very picky about the limu, yeah, they must know something. So what I realized, as Randy had stated yesterday, the Hawaii he knew of yesterday is not what we see today. And that's kind of what I feel as I move to Oahu, is I don't see people that have that ono for limu. I don't see them have ho'okano for certain things and say, I'm not going to go to their luau. Their squid luau is not good. Molokai is like, oh, okay, we're going to go to the Nakis luau because they make good hihivai, That those guys, they make good limu kohu, and just looking at the pupu table, So it's that understanding of your foods that is so important and so critical to our cultural understandings. And on Molokai, everybody say what we love, we protect. And so, because we love our aina so much, we have this kind of ferocious love. So a lot of people are afraid of Molokai. It's like, those guys too radical, rebellious. But really, if you understand what we love, we protect. And that's really the cultural understandings. And it has to do with, centered around these rights is really understanding that aina is family. We have genealogical relationships to the land. So the classic stories of Haloa and Father Skywalker and Goddess Ho'ohoku Kalani birthed Haloa, the stillborn child, which planted in the ground became the kalo plant. And when you look at name aspects of the kalo plant, the oha, these things are the root of family. And then their second child was also named Haloa, the progenitor of the Hawaiian race. So there are reciprocal relationships. It's not just rights, it's kuleana, it's responsibilities. And I think daycare officers, if Hawaiians are telling you, I'm Hawaiian, I can do whatever I like, your response is, you don't have a get out of jail card just for being Hawaiian. You have kuleana, you have responsibilities. And I think if you can hone on that, everything becomes crystal clear. Also, there are aumakua relationships. There are ancestors that have become deified, and they are in the form of different animals or aspects of nature. So the mano, a lot of Hawaiian families, their aumakua is the mano. I grew up hearing stories from my dad and my grandma saying that my great-grandmother used to feed our aumakua shark in Wailau Valley on the North Shore before she relocated to the south side. So if the aina and all the natural elements are your family and there's no separation, then your responsibility to aina is very clear. And ohana played a very vital role in the life of the ahupua'a. There's examples of, the extended ohana in the mountain area, and those on the ocean side, they're sharing with each other. And there's haku, there's leaders within each family that are recognized for their expertise and can rally the ohana together to work on some of these big projects. And what remained a constant of the land was the ohana. Despite political changes, despite the changing of chiefs, one conquering the other, what remained in the life of the ahupua'a were these ohana. And if they were mistreated, then they relocated. So the chief's responsibility was that of trustee, and to make the land productive, to make the land momona. So there was this reciprocal relationship as well between chief, or now state government, and maka'ainana, the people of the land. And there's a lot of traditional wisdom and knowledge within these families of their place. So as we look at the life of people in their ahupua'a, in their place, we realize that the sources of law within this state are really based on these kinds of practices. So I'll be covering some of the constitutional and statutory provisions that really came from the time of the kingdom when custom became codified into law under the kingdom and then was adopted by the state. And then looking at some of the relevant cases. So during the Mahele, there was this Kuleana reservation. So many land titles you will see has this Kuleana reservation, reserving the rights of native tenants. And what that really means is, just like me and my ahupua of Kamalo or Walapue, I have a right to go and gather certain things in my ahupua for my daily living, for my subsistence. So as we get into cases like Pash, it describes that, land, property in Hawaii is different from Western property. You don't have all the bundles of sticks, one being the right to alienate and exclude people from the land. If they're legitimately practicing their traditional and customary practices for their subsistence and daily living, then they have a right to go across these areas. But the state has a right to reasonably regulate those rights. So we start with the Kuleana Act in 1850. Really, it gave people the right to gather certain enumerated items like tea leaf, firewood, aho cord, thatch, things that were important for housing, for making your cooking fires, those sort of things. But at the time when the act was passed in 1850, it required permission to go and traverse on these lands, and that became problematic. So this is an example of a petition of 54 Ho'aina Ahupua tenants in Kaneohe, and they were saying that, King, we are in trouble. The landlords, the chiefs are not letting us go into the mountain and collect firewood. We're feeding our children uncooked potato and uncooked taro, and we're suffering. So what the king realized was he had to revise the Kuleana Act, and he talked about these rights being really reflecting his concern that even a little bit of land, even a lodio title, even though you owe it in fee, if the people are cut off from their very basic privileges, then the land would be worthless, would be of very little value. So it's really understanding that we still have these, Native Hawaiians still have these rights to gather certain enumerated items, and they're in the Kuleana Act. So it's the right to take firewood, aho cord, thatch, tea leaf, the right to running water, these sorts of things. And they were adopted when Hawaii became a state as Hawaii Revised Statute 7-1. Now, Hawaii Revised 1-1, you have to think of it sort of as a catch-all. So 7-1 talks about you have a right to tea leaf, aho cord, thatch. 1-1 covers other traditional and customary rights. So, if it can be shown that Hawaiian people eat opihi, gathering opihi is not enumerated in 7-1, but it can be assumed in 1-1. So what the law does is it instructs courts to look to English and American common law for guidance, except where it conflicts with traditional and customary rights. Okay, so it's going back and trying to understand what is the Hawaiian customs, and then knowing that that is a valid and important part of our law. So, the way it was explained to me was by Chief Justice Richardson. When I was still a law student, he came to our class and he talked about Kama'aina witness testimony. Going to Kama'aina, people who are actually part of the land, and asking them, well, what's the custom? And so he asked, where do you park your canoe? And do you park it where the highest wash of the waves can hit? Where do you park it? And he's like, well, we park it, where the waves can't hit, and that's where like the naupaka grows, the vegetation line is. So he said, okay, we're gonna look to Hawaiian custom and usage, and since Hawaiians park their canoes at the vegetation line, That's the delineation between state and private. And that's why there's no private beaches in Hawaii. So some landowners got a little clever. They made fake vegetation line. They grew naupaka where naupaka doesn't really grow. And the court said, no, you cannot make fake vegetation line. We're going to go to the natural vegetation line. So again, it's looking to Hawaiian custom. And it's real common sense stuff, really. So easy. ABC, this is easy. You don't even think this is hard. Okay? Article 12, Section 7, it just basically reaffirms these rights and constitutionally protects these rights. And this was part of the amendments that were made during the 1978 Constitutional Convention. The Kalipi case, when I showed you my fishing grounds, the Ahupua right next over, that's the Kalipis, that's where they live. And I laugh at that case because they said that Uncle Billy Kalipi lived in this Ahupua, but he was trying to gather a little at this other Ahupua. And honestly, it is literally a stone's throw away. As I told you, the Ahupuas are so small. But at that time, the court literally interpreted 7-1 and said, well, you have to physically reside in your Ahupua in order for us to recognize these rights. But it was expanded in Pele. In Pele Defense Fund, it was found like people like Papa Awai, who was the late Papa Awai, who was a kahuna la'au lapa'au, and other people in the Puna region would go and gather in Va'okeleo Puna, where this geothermal project was taking place. And so the court held that, you have shown that you customarily gather in this area. Your family, your ohana generations, you've been doing this. We're going to recognize this under 1-1. So your gathering rights may extend beyond your immediate ahupa of residence. So really, it's a case-by-case thing. You have to ask, what is the tradition of the people here and their relationship to place. Pash, the main thing you have to get out of this really is Hawaiian traditional and customary rights. Hawaiians exercising this, they have standing. At the time, it was a case that had to do with a development, non-se corporation, and it was affecting people's ability to gather opai ula in the ankyline ponds. And the court said, well, this is not undeveloped land, but it's less than fully developed. So it also expanded Kalipi. The Kalipi case said you can only exercise your rights on undeveloped land. But in this instance, they're like, well, this land is not fully developed, but we still see that certain traditional and customary practices are taking place here, and we need to recognize that. And government can't make a decision that would virtually extinguish these rights. So the state obligation is to make sure you don't extinguish these rights totally out of existence. And protecting these rights is not a taking of property within the meaning of the Fifth Amendment of the federal Constitution. Because as I said earlier, property in Hawaii is different from property in the mainland. There are certain trust responsibilities attached to it. And then Kapa'akai really honed in on the fact that state and county agencies, they have an affirmative duty to protect traditional and customary Hawaiian rights. And they can't abdicate that duty to someone else. They have to do an independent analysis. So there are certain certain criteria on analyzing. But the basic gist of that is, are there any traditional and customary practices taking place in the subject area? Identify them, okay? If there are, then what is the potential impact to those rights? Once you figure that out, then what can we do to reasonably protect these rights? How can we mitigate the impacts? And that's basically what the standard is. So in summary, where are Hawaiian access rights protected? It's in one's ahupua'a of residence, and if it is shown to be customary, it may extend to other ahupua'a. It occurs on undeveloped land or less than fully developed lands. So the analogy of fully developed, I would use this example. Ala Moana Shopping Center, there's some tea leaf in the landscaping. You go collect some tea leaf and say, I'm exercising my traditional and customary rights. That might be arguable. That's fully developed. Okay, but I have to confess that, Professor Kapua Sproat, she exercises her traditional and customary rights in this courtyard and makes tea leaf lace. So I'm not gonna buck her and say you cannot do that. Okay, so that's fully developed, I would say, Ala Moana Shopping Mall. Okay, what is the state's obligations to Native Hawaiians? Ensure that these rights aren't regulated out of existence, and affirmatively protect these rights. Make that independent assessment, as I said earlier. Determine what the impacts are and adjust accordingly to reasonably protect these rights. There are also Hawaiian rights in a criminal trespass case. So basically, it's proving that the claimant proving a traditional and customary right needs to show Hawaiian ancestry and provide an adequate foundation in the record that connects the claim right to a firmly rooted traditional customary Native Hawaiian practice. So one of the examples that was posed to me, Marine Life Conservation District, Hawaiian is fishing in there, and there's a couple in that area, and the care officer comes and say, hey, you're fishing in a MLCD, and you're saying, too bad, I'm Hawaiian. No, is there a foundation? If the state is imposing some kind of kapu because there's not enough fish in this area, then it would be arguable that looking to Hawaiian tradition and custom, if a kapu is put on this place, then recognize the kapu and self-regulate yourself. So again, it's not a get out of jail free card. Show that the exercise or the claim right occurred on undeveloped or less than fully developed land. So not Ala Moana, okay? So how is the balance struck between the state's constitutional obligation to protect Native Hawaiian traditional and customary rights and its authority to reasonably regulate those rights? So in the Pratt case, it was a Hawaiian practitioner in Kalalau, and he was restoring heiau and restoring lo'i and doing things that the court said, yes, that is a traditional Hawaiian customary practice. But he didn't have a camping permit, and he pretty much made his house over there. I mean, he just stayed there. So what the court said is, we're going to look at this on a case-by-case basis, and we're going to look at the totality of the circumstances. And what we find here is the camping permit requirements are reasonable. And Mr. Pratt could get a camping permit like everybody else. So look at your regulation, see if it totally precludes traditional and customary Hawaiian rights, if it's regulating the rights out of existence. And if it isn't, if it makes reasonable accommodations for traditional and customary practice, then I would say you're safe. Okay, so these are the limits. Don't regulate them out of existence. You be reasonable in how you regulate, and really go to the essence of what Hawaiian cultural practice is. So a person that provides really good direction in this is Professor Daviana McGregor, and she's been a cultural expert in a lot of these cases I've been talking about. And to me, it's like Hawaiian 101. I was raised with these understandings. It's only take what you need, don't waste, be mindful when the fish are spawning, don't go gather them then. Don't stay in one place, go different places so you don't put too much pressure on the resources. If you see the resource declining, couple yourself. Gathering these resources requires skill, and you don't need to go get more than what you need. Respect the knowledge that was passed down to you, and follow what your kupuna said. Respect other areas where other families have kuleana. Don't go maha'oi into another ahupua'a. Be focused, be mindful on what you're doing, and don't be greedy. Share with others, share with your family, share with your neighbors, share with your kupuna, and honor the knowledge that they pass down to you. All these things are very basic, and if you're in the field and you encounter issues like this, just say, are they following the essence of these teachings? Another area I'd like to cover is the public trust. There's been a lot of litigation around our freshwater resources, and Article 11, Section 7 talks about this public trust in water. And it really came about from the McBride case. It was a controversy between two sugar companies that were treating water like a commodity. And the court said, no. Water is not a commodity. When you look back into the Hawaiian custom and the history of the kingdom, the king reserved his sovereign prerogatives, which included the power to encourage and even to enforce the usufruct of lands for the common good, water being a usufruct. Basic plain English, it means land is nothing without water. So it's a resource that has to be protected in trust for the common good. And so the state constitution recognizes this principle. And in the Waihole decision, water ditch decision, it further defined what this public trust means and what the obligations are. So it's keeping the o'opu and the hihivai healthy in the streams. It's making sure it's not waste when the stream water enters the ocean, into the estuary, and into the marine waters. These are nursery grounds for fish and crab and limu and all these things. They contribute to the productivity and the sustainability of our islands. And this is a public trust. In further water cases, they also looked at public trust as being natural and cultural resources. So resources like fish and limu and crab, these kinds of things, that they're also part of the public trust, the protection of native Hawaiian traditional and customary rights and the resources that are associated with that. Nawai'eha case on Maui, again, it just reaffirmed this public trust. Another thing of the public trust is the precautionary principle. A lot of people are saying, okay, we don't know, there's not enough scientific evidence that taking this water is going to cause harm. And we're going to put it on the plaintiff, on the traditional and customary Hawaiian practitioner. We're going to put the burden on them to prove that diverting this water is harming them. What the court said in Waihole was, no, the burden is on the applicant that's utilizing and diverting that water. And where we don't have full scientific evidence, we're going to err on the side of caution. So that's what the precautionary principle is. And that's what the public trust protects. So going kind of in the marine area now. So I was talking about the ahupua'a. The ahupua'a, Maukatu Makai, it also includes fish ponds and the fisheries. And so in 1839, 1842, 1859, these laws became, these customary understandings of ahupua'a and management of the fisheries itself became codified into law under the kingdom. And basically, the Konohiki fisheries includes fishing grounds from the reefs and where there happen to be no reefs, from the distance of 1 geographical mile from the beach at low water mark shall in law be considered the private property of the konohiki. So these laws recognize that konohiki had the authority to place kapu on fish or place a kapu during certain seasons when fish were spawning, and that a third of the share of the catch would go back to the konohiki. That really is payment for taking care of the resources and monitoring the health of the fishery and making adjustments in the management that were necessary to keep the resource abundant. And the konohiki could not exceed his authority and overtax and overburden the people. And this system worked to create thriving and maintain thriving resources. But at the time of the Organic Act, when Hawaii became annexed to the United States, laws were passed to force konohiki fisheries to be registered, and if they weren't registered, they were condemned. And so the konohiki fisheries were thrown into the public domain, and what essentially happened are the issues we're facing today. Tragedy of the commons, the dying off and depletion of our fishing resources. There were a slew of cases on the federal and territory level, and there were a lot of conflict between those cases. The territorial courts wanted to totally eliminate konohiki fisheries, whereas the U.S. Supreme Court and the federal courts were saying we still recognize these vested rights of the konohiki and the ho'aina in these fisheries, that these piscatory rights are appurtenances, they're attached to the land. So much like the ho'aina has, the ahupua'a attendant has a right to gather certain enumerated items for daily living, the fisheries were seen as having these vested rights, and it's still not resolved. And we haven't gone into any major cases since statehood on this issue. But what I would argue is that because now these waters are subject to the ceded lands from 3 nautical miles out, they're part of a trust. So when the Admissions Act, when we became a state, Section 5F identifies these lands, the marine waters, and it identifies Native Hawaiians as one of the beneficiaries of that trust. So as we begin to look at these different Hawaiian cases, Hawaiian rights cases, and looking at public trust, we may infer from that there may be certain trust responsibilities in our marine waters, similar to what you see in the Waihole case, some of these freshwater cases. They're instructive for us. There's also, like freshwater, there's also a section in the Hawaii State Constitution that specifically identifies marine resources and waters as part of the public trust. So again, we can infer from some of these freshwater cases that the same would apply to our ocean resources. And we can look to other areas of the country for instruction on what that trust relationship might be. So in Washington, in the state of Washington, there's a boat decision, and they interpreted Indian treaty fishing rights as with the United States as meaning Indian tribes have 50% of the right to the total allowable catch as the rest of the general public. So what's happened in Washington is they have the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. They're a consortium of over 20 Indian tribes working in a co-management structure with the state of Washington, and they share data with each other. So there's tremendous things that have been done between the state and the tribes, and I think it can be a model for us. And we have certain structures already that can begin to create this kind of co-management model. Very briefly, UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This UN declaration was adopted by the United States in 2010. And one of the things it talks about is free, prior, informed consent. So free implies no coercion, intimidation, or manipulation in working with Indigenous peoples. Prior implies that consent is obtained in advance of the activity, not after the fact. Informed means that Indigenous peoples understand the impact of what the information is being shared, and that they're able to make decisions in a way that is customary to them, and consent, being true consent, that they went through their processes, their own internal processes to come to a decision. So since the United States has adopted this, and since in Hawaii we have very strict laws around traditional and customary Hawaiian practices, this just emphasizes that kuleana on the part of the state working cooperatively with Native Hawaiian communities. And as I said earlier, we already have structures in place, and that is the ahamoku system. On Molokai, we call it ahakiole, so I'm very ma'ag to calling it ahakiole. But really, it's talking about moving from not just looking at traditional and customary Hawaiian rights as a right to access certain places for our cultural and natural resources, but also looking to Hawaiian custom and usage to elicit some of that idea of malama, of caring for our resources. And that's very much part of our tradition, our konohiki tradition. And I know we haven't moved into this arena yet in jurisprudence, but we can work collaboratively on this administrative level to make sure that happens. And the mana'o, the history of ahakiole is very beautiful. Kumujanka Imikawa explained it to us as a weaving of expertise from different traditional knowledge holders to make the land abundant, to make it momona. And he described to me this phrase, aya nakai po'olo o Molokai. And it's called, there are the turbulent waters of Molokai. And it was really describing that real Pono management of our fisheries and maximizing, understanding the ecosystem dynamics and creating this sort of microclimate in our fish ponds, such that the fish were so abundant that they churned the water so that the water inside the pond was more turbulent than the water outside of the pond. And that's where we can come back again. And that's what our goal should be, aina momona, to return to that abundance and that way of understanding, And so the state adopted this ahamoku system, and really it's an underutilized resource. And I would encourage that our ahamoku reps continue to pollute that water and get more of the various moku, the districts on each island, organized and get their ahupua'a organized, because they can be an asset to DoCare in enforcement and in informing what traditional practices would work to bring that aina momona back. And I'm very happy to hear about the CFEU project, the successful one on Maui, and we need to see more of that, and working with our traditional knowledge holders to make sure the resources are abundant once more. So, what tools can we use? Reintroduce Hawaiian customary norms. Ahupua'a management, konohiki management was adaptive management, and we need to be moving in that direction. And we need to reduce top-down command and control regulation and really work with communities. So I'm just going to show some pictures really fast and not talk too much. This is our tradition. Manolua Bay was abundant. We can go back to that. And I like this saying, today the word fisherman often implies fish removal. This contrasts to the Konohiki era, where much of the time was spent stocking protected fish ponds with juveniles to ensure a healthy fishery. Again, that malama, that giving back, yeah. Where, we're feeling climate change. This is my friend Malia Nobriga from Hanapepe, and she's saying the sea level is rising and covering their salt beds. So we got to be able to respond in real time to these kind of challenges. And Konohiki management is that. It's adaptive. It's making decisions in real time that are pono for our resources. This is Uncle Mac. He's done a tremendous job in teaching the children to become pono fishermen. And now they're adults and they have kids and they're teaching their kids these things. And it's establishing that code of conduct. Some of the things that Professor McGregor had shared, Also utilizing traditional ecological knowledge that is customized to place. Utilizing moon calendar and understanding cycles. Observing couple periods. Understanding reproductive cycles and behaviors of fish. So like uhu, I didn't know this until I learned this from Uncle Matt. You gotta preserve the male uhu because they travel in harems. So you don't kill the blue one, or else you're gonna affect their ability to reproduce. I also learned about lobster. If you harvest it before it's 7 years old, you're stealing from future generations. Also limu practices for limu, looking at certain dry and wet seasons, when limu should be harvested and when it should be given time to regenerate. Fishing your own ahupa'a, don't maha'oi in other places. Take only what you need. Rotate your areas where you fish and gather. Eat pono. Don't just eat, ahi. Eat kole, palani, kala. Eat all different kind. So eat pono. Don't be too ho'okano about that. And what we found in the results of that management was where people were involved utilizing that traditional ecological knowledge, the resources were restored and abounded, even more so than areas that were no-take areas. And continue to build collaborative relationships with community. So this is not only happening on Molokai, it's happening in Kahana, and one of the things my student Kamaka shared with me is they did fish fries and they talked to fishermen and they said, we were raised in a way that we understand what is pono fishing practices, but so many people are overfishing, so then we feel pressured to be like that. But now they feel empowered and they have their own kilo kai program and they're renewing these pono practices. So community can be an asset and a total help to restore the abundance. And I'm so glad that Uncle Randy Awo is working with them and Docare is working with Kahana. And we had our clinic there working with them. And, one of the reasons why they put a ban on jet skis in Kahana is because the fish are spawning in there. It's a nursery, it's an estuary. And so as they begin to educate these jet ski guys who are still po'opakiki, I think over time we're going to get more people having ownership of this and bringing the momona back to Kahana. So this is what they're doing in this community, and it's rebuilding that pride and sense of community. And I think that is the key, having these kind of collaborative partnerships. Mahalo.